The gunshot echoed across the mesa just as Josephine Ashford's horse reared, throwing her backward into the rocky ravine below. And she knew before she even hit the ground that her journey to California had just ended in the worst possible way. Pain exploded through her left ankle as she landed awkwardly between two boulders, the sound of bones snapping audible even over her own scream. Her horse, spooked by the distant gunfire, disappeared over the ridge, leaving her alone in the sprawling Arizona wilderness with the sun already past its zenith. She tried to move, tried to pull herself up, but the agony that shot through her leg made her vision blur and her stomach turn. When she finally looked down, she could see the unnatural angle of her foot, and tears sprang to her eyes not just from pain, but from the terrifying realization of her situation. It was April of 1882, and she had been traveling alone from Tucson toward the California border, foolishly confident in her ability to make the journey without a guide. Her father had always said she was too stubborn for her own good, and now, lying in this God-forsaken ravine miles from anywhere, she understood what he meant. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions. Nothing but scrub brush, cactus, and red rock formations that looked beautiful from a distance, but offered no comfort when you were injured and alone. She tried calling out, her voice hoarse and desperate, but the only response was the whistle of wind through the canyon and the distant cry of a hawk. Hours seemed to pass, though it might have been only minutes. The pain in her ankle had settled into a constant, throbbing torture, and she knew that if she did not get help soon, she would either die from exposure or from whatever infection would inevitably set into the wound. She had no water, no supplies beyond what had been in her saddlebags on her now vanished horse, and no realistic hope of rescue. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when she heard the sound of hooves on rock. At first she thought it was her imagination, some cruel trick her mind was playing as dehydration and shock set in. But then she heard a man's voice, low and calm, speaking to his horse. She tried to call out again, and this time her voice carried far enough to catch his attention. Within moments, a figure appeared at the edge of the ravine, silhouetted against the orange sky. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty hat and carrying a rifle across his back. For a moment, Josephine's heart seized with fear because out here, a stranger could be as dangerous as the wilderness itself. But then he was climbing down toward her, his movements careful and deliberate, and when he got close enough, she could see his face. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but there was something gentle in his expression as he knelt beside her, his gaze immediately going to her injured ankle. "That looks bad," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as a man who had spent his life in the Southwest. "Real bad. What happened?" "My horse threw me," Josephine managed, her voice shaking. "Gunfire spooked him. I think my ankle is broken." He nodded, already pulling his canteen from his belt and offering it to her. "Name is Ryder Zimmerman. I have been tracking cattle rustlers through this territory for the past 3 days. Heard the shots about an hour back and came to investigate. Lucky I did, or you would have been out here all night." She drank gratefully, the water soothing her parched throat. "Josephine Ashford. I was heading to California, but I suppose that plan is finished now." Ryder was already examining her ankle, his touch surprisingly gentle despite his rough hands. She winced as he carefully probed the injury, and he made a sympathetic sound in his throat. "It is broken, no question. I need to splint it before we can move you, or you will do even more damage. This is going to hurt." "Everything already hurts," she said. attempting a weak smile. He looked up at her then, and something passed between them, some unspoken understanding that in this moment she was entirely dependent on him, and he was not going to let her down. "I am going to take care of you," he said simply. "You have my word." Ryder worked quickly, pulling supplies from his saddlebags that he had retrieved from where his horse waited above. He found 2 straight branches from a nearby mesquite tree and stripped them of their smaller offshoots, then tore strips from his own shirt to use as binding. The whole time he talked to her, his voice steady and calming, asking her questions about where she was from and where she had been going, anything to keep her mind off what he was about to do. "I grew up in Kansas," she told him, her voice tight with anticipation of the pain to come. "My father was a merchant, but he died last winter. I have a brother in Sacramento who offered to take me in, help me start fresh. I thought I could make the journey alone." "That was brave," Ryder said, positioning the splints on either side of her ankle. "Foolish, maybe, but brave. Out here, being alone can get you killed faster than anything else. You ready?" She nodded, biting down on the leather strap he offered her, and then he was setting the bone. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a white-hot agony that made her scream around the leather and nearly black out. But Ryder's hands were sure and quick, and within moments, he had the bone aligned and was wrapping the splints tightly to immobilize it. "Done," he said, tying off the last strip of cloth. "That should hold until we can get you to a proper doctor. The nearest town is Bisbee, about 15 miles southwest of here. I can get us there by tomorrow afternoon if we start now." Josephine's head was spinning and she felt nauseated from the pain. "I cannot walk 15 miles. "No," Ryder agreed, "but I can carry you." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Carry me for 15 miles. "My horse can carry us both for part of it," he explained, "and when he needs rest, I will carry you on foot. It is not ideal, but it is the only option we have. Staying out here is not a choice, Miss Ashford, not with that injury and no supplies." She wanted to argue, to tell him it was impossible, that he could not possibly carry a grown woman across 15 miles of wilderness. But looking at him, at the determination in his eyes and the set of his jaw, she realized he meant every word. He was going to get her to safety, no matter what it took. Ryder lifted her as carefully as he could, one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back, mindful of her injured ankle. Even with his care, the movement sent fresh waves of pain through her leg, and she bit back a cry. He carried her up the side of the ravine, his boots finding purchase on the loose rock with the sure-footedness of a man who had spent his entire life in rough country. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, waited patiently at the top. Ryder settled Josephine into the saddle as gently as possible, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "Hold on to me," he instructed. "If the pain gets too bad, you tell me and we will stop." She leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, and for the first time since her fall, she felt a small measure of hope. They began moving southwest, toward Bisbee, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. The journey was agony. Every step the horse took sent jolts of pain through Josephine's ankle, and despite Ryder's careful pace, she found herself biting her lip until it bled just to keep from crying out. But true to his word, whenever she made even the smallest sound of distress, he would stop, checking on her and offering water and words of encouragement. As darkness fell, they made camp in a small hollow protected from the wind. Ryder built a fire and made her as comfortable as possible with his bedroll, then disappeared into the darkness to hunt. He returned an hour later with 2 rabbits, which he skinned and cooked over the fire while Josephine drifted in and out of consciousness, exhausted from pain and shock. You need to eat, he said gently, offering her a portion of the meat. Keep your strength up. She ate mechanically, the food tasteless in her mouth, but she knew he was right. Why are you doing this? She asked suddenly. You could have just pointed me toward Bisbee and left me. Why risk yourself for a stranger? Ryder was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. My sister died out in country like this, he said finally. She and her husband were traveling to their new homestead when their wagon broke down. By the time someone found them, it was too late. She was only 20 years old. I swore after that I would never leave someone stranded if I had the power to help them. Josephine felt tears sting her eyes, though whether from his words or her own pain she could not say. I am sorry about your sister. So am I, he said quietly. Now get some rest. We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow. She slept fitfully, waking often from nightmares or from the throbbing pain in her ankle. Each time she found Ryder awake, keeping watch, and his presence became a comfort in the darkness. Once in the deepest part of the night, she woke to find him gently adjusting the splint on her ankle, checking to make sure it had not shifted while she slept. Does it hurt much? He asked softly, noticing she was awake. Yes, she admitted, but less than it did. He nodded, his face illuminated by the dying embers of the fire. That is good. Means the bone is set properly. You are going to be all right, Miss Ashford. Josephine, she said, if you are going to carry me across the Arizona desert, you should probably call me by my first name. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. Josephine, then, and you can call me Ryder if we are being familiar. Ryder, she repeated, liking the way it sounded. Were you born here, in Arizona? He shook his head. Texas, originally. My family moved to Arizona Territory when I was 12, looking for better ranching land. I have been working cattle and doing odd jobs ever since. The rancher I work for sent me out to track down some rustlers who have been hitting his herds. That is what I was doing when I found you. Did you catch them? The rustlers? Not yet, he admitted, but they will keep. Getting you to safety is more important. She studied his face in the firelight, this man who had appeared out of nowhere and taken responsibility for her without a second thought. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, but it was more than that. There was something solid about him, something utterly dependable, and she found herself drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. He met her eyes, and something passed between them again, something deeper than gratitude. Try to sleep, was all he said, but his voice was rougher than before. They set out again before dawn, Ryder wanting to cover as much ground as possible before the sun reached its peak. For the first few hours, Josephine rode on the horse while Ryder walked alongside, leading the animal. But as the morning wore on and the temperature began to climb, she could see the horse was tiring under their combined weight. Ryder, the horse needs rest, she said, hating to state the obvious but knowing it was true. He nodded, helping her down and then lifting her into his arms once more. We will walk for a while, he said, as if carrying a full-grown woman was the most natural thing in the world. For the next 2 hours, he carried her across the desert floor, his steps never faltering despite the heat and the weight. Josephine tried to stay as still as possible, her arms around his neck, acutely aware of every place their bodies touched. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his skin through his shirt, the strength in his arms that held her as if she weighed nothing at all. This is impossible, she said after a while. You cannot carry me all the way to Bisbee. Watch me, he replied, a hint of stubbornness in his voice that reminded her of herself. Despite the pain and the desperate nature of their situation, she found herself smiling. You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish. Probably both, he admitted, and there was warmth in his voice that made her heart beat a little faster. They stopped at midday to rest in the shade of a rock formation, and Ryder checked her ankle again, making sure the splint was still secure. His fingers were gentle as they traced the swelling, and Josephine found herself watching his face, memorizing the line of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. "It is holding well," he said, looking up to find her watching him. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ryder cleared his throat and stood, turning away to check on his horse. They pushed on through the afternoon, alternating between Josephine riding and Ryder carrying her. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Ryder pointed ahead. "Bisbee," he said simply. Josephine followed his gaze and saw, in the distance, the scattered buildings of a town nestled in the hills. Relief flooded through her so strongly that she felt tears on her cheeks. "We made it," she whispered. "We made it," Ryder confirmed, and there was satisfaction in his voice, but also something else, something that sounded almost like regret. They reached the outskirts of Bisbee as darkness fell. The town was a mining community, bustling with activity even at this hour. Ryder carried Josephine straight to the doctor's office, a small building with a sign that read, "Dr. Marcus Chen, physician and surgeon." The doctor was a middle-aged Chinese man with kind eyes and capable hands. He took one look at Josephine's ankle and nodded approvingly at Ryder's splinting work. "You did well," he told Ryder. "The bone is set properly. Another day out in the desert, an infection would have been a serious concern, but we caught it in time." Ryder waited while the doctor cleaned the wound, applied medicine, and replaced Ryder's makeshift splint with a proper cast. Throughout it all, he stood nearby, his presence a comfort even though he said little. When the doctor finished, he gave Josephine instructions for care and told her she would need to stay off the ankle for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Josephine repeated, her heart sinking. She had no money for lodging, no means of supporting herself for that long, doctor. Chen seemed to read her thoughts. "There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Fletcher on Main Street. She is a good woman and will give you a fair rate. As for payment for my services, we can discuss that when you are back on your feet." Ryder spoke up then. "I will take care of her bill, Doc. And I will make sure she gets settled at the boarding house." Both Josephine and the doctor looked at him in surprise. "Ryder, you have already done so much," Josephine protested. "I cannot ask you to pay for my medical care too." "You did not ask," he said firmly. "I am offering. Besides, I have been saving my wages for months with nothing to spend them on. Let me do this." There was no arguing with him. Josephine was learning. When Ryder Zimmerman made up his mind about something, he saw it through. The doctor accepted his payment, and then Ryder was lifting Josephine once more, carrying her through the streets of Bisbee toward the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher was indeed a kind woman, middle-aged and motherly, who took one look at Josephine's pale, exhausted face and immediately prepared a room. She helped Josephine wash and change into a borrowed nightgown, clucking sympathetically over her injury the whole time. "That young man of yours is quite devoted," Mrs. Fletcher said as she tucked Josephine into bed. "Carrying you all the way from the desert, that is true love if I ever saw it." "He is not my young man," Josephine protested weakly. "He is just someone who helped me." Mrs. Fletcher gave her a knowing look, but said nothing more. She left a tray of food and promised to check on Josephine in the morning. Alone in the quiet room, Josephine finally let herself relax. Clean, fed, and safe, the events of the past day and a half seemed almost unreal. But her ankle, throbbing steadily despite the doctor's medicine, was a constant reminder that it had all been very real. As was the memory of Ryder's arms around her, his steady presence, his determination to save her. She expected him to leave now, to go back to his job tracking rustlers or whatever else cowboys did. The thought left her feeling hollow in a way she did not fully understand. She had known him for less than 2 days, yet the idea of never seeing him again was unbearable. There was a soft knock at her door and Mrs. Fletcher's voice called, "You have a visitor, dear." Josephine's heart leaped. "Come in." Ryder entered, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way he had not looked even in the middle of the desert. "I wanted to make sure you were settled," he said. "And to say goodbye." "Goodbye." The word came out sharper than she intended. He nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I need to get back to work. The rustlers are still out there and my boss is depending on me, but Mrs. Fletcher has my information if you need anything. I have paid for your room for the next 2 months, which should be enough time for you to heal and figure out your next step." 2 months. Josephine struggled to sit up straighter. "Ryder, that is too much. You have already done more than anyone could expect." "It is done," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Please, Josephine, let me do this. After what happened to my sister, I need to know that you will be all right." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the pain behind his words. This was not just about helping a stranger. This was about assuaging guilt, about making right something that had gone terribly wrong in his past. But it was more than that, too. She could see it in the way he looked at her, in the way he could not quite bring himself to leave. "Stay," she said impulsively. "Just for tonight." "I do not want to be alone." He hesitated, and she saw the war in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "I will be right outside your door. If you need anything, anything at all, you call for me." "Thank you," she whispered. He settled himself in the hallway, his back against the wall beside her door, and Josephine lay in the darkness, comforted by the knowledge that he was near. She slept better than she had since her accident, dreamless and deep. When she woke in the morning, he was gone. The first week in Bisbee passed slowly. Josephine's ankle healed gradually, the initial agony fading to a dull, constant ache. Mrs. Fletcher proved to be excellent company, chatty and warm, bringing Josephine meals and sitting with her in the afternoons to share gossip about the town. But despite the older woman's kindness, Josephine found herself constantly thinking about Ryder, wondering where he was and if he thought about her too. She told herself she was being foolish. He had saved her life, yes, but that did not mean anything beyond common decency. He had his own life, his own responsibilities. There was no reason for him to come back, but on the 8th day, there was a knock at her door, and when Mrs. Fletcher opened it, Ryder stood there, dusty and tired but very much present. "I was in town buying supplies," he said, as if that explained everything. "Thought I should check on how you are healing." Josephine's heart soared. "I am doing well. Dr. Chen says the bone is knitting properly." He nodded, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "That is good. That is real good." An awkward silence fell. Then Ryder cleared his throat. "Would you like some company? I do not have to head back until tomorrow morning." "I would love some company," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. He pulled up a chair beside her bed and they talked for hours. She learned that he was 24, just 2 years older than herself. He had been working as a cowboy since he was 16, moving from ranch to ranch, never staying in one place for long. He loved the freedom of the open range but admitted it could be lonely sometimes. "You have family here?" she asked. "My parents moved back to Texas 3 years ago," he said. "Said Arizona was too wild for them. My sister, the one who died, she was my only sibling, so it is just me now." The loneliness in his voice matched her own. "I understand that. After my father died, it felt like I had no one. My brother and I were never close. That is why I was heading to California, I suppose, trying to find somewhere I belonged." "And where do you think that is?" Ryder asked quietly. She met his eyes. I am starting to think it might be here." He did not respond, but something in his expression softened, and when he reached out to take her hand, she let him. Ryder began visiting every few days, timing his trips to town to coincide with checking on Josephine. He brought her books from the general store, fresh fruit when he could find it, and once, a small bouquet of wildflowers that made her laugh with delight. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations flowing easily from serious topics to playful banter. Mrs. Fletcher watched their growing attachment with approval. "He is a good man," she told Josephine one afternoon. "Hard to find men like that these days, men who know how to take care of someone." "We are just friends," Josephine said, but even she did not believe it anymore. The truth was, she was falling in love with Ryder Zimmerman. It had started the moment he climbed down into that ravine to help her, and it had grown with every mile he carried her, every gentle touch, every visit. She loved his quiet strength, his dry sense of humor, the way his whole face changed when he smiled. She loved how he listened when she talked, really listened, and how he treated her like an equal even when she was at her most vulnerable. But she did not know if he felt the same way. He was unfailingly kind and attentive, but he never spoke of his feelings beyond friendship. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, but then he would look away, and the moment would pass. 6 weeks after her accident, Dr. Chen removed her cast and declared her ankle healed enough to walk with a cane. The relief of being mobile again was enormous, and Josephine took her first tentative steps around the boarding house with Mrs. Fletcher hovering nervously nearby. Ryder arrived that evening, and when he saw her standing at the window, looking out at the street, his face broke into a genuine smile. "You are up." "I am up," she confirmed, turning to face him with the help of her cane. "Dr. Chen says in another month or so I should be able to walk normally again." "That is wonderful," he said, and he meant it. But there was something else in his expression too, something that looked almost like sadness. "What is wrong?" she asked, limping over to sit in her usual chair. He sat across from her, turning his hat in his hands. "I came to tell you that the rancher I work for caught the rustlers. They are in jail in Tucson awaiting trial. My job is done." "That is good news," Josephine said, confused by his somber tone. "It is," he agreed. "But it means I will be moving on. There is a ranch up near Prescott looking for experienced hands. Good pay, steady work. I leave in 3 days." The bottom dropped out of Josephine's world. "Oh, I wanted to tell you in person," Ryder continued, still not meeting her eyes. "And to make sure you are set up properly before I go. Mrs. Fletcher says you have been helping her with the books and correspondence, earning your keep. That is good. You will be fine here." "Yes," Josephine said faintly. "I will be fine." But she would not be fine. She would be heartbroken. These past weeks with Ryder had been the happiest of her life, even confined to a bed with a broken ankle. The thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again, was unbearable. They sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Ryder stood. "I should go. I have things to prepare." "Ryder," she said, and he stopped, turning back to her. She wanted to tell him she loved him, wanted to beg him to stay, but the words stuck in her throat. What right did she have to ask him to change his plans for her? "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, his jaw tight, and then he was gone. Josephine spent the next 2 days in misery. She tried to focus on her recovery, on her work helping Mrs. Fletcher, but everything felt hollow. Mrs. Fletcher, perceptive as always, finally confronted her. "You love him," the older woman said flatly. There was no point in denying it. "Yes. And does he know?" "No." "Why on earth not?" Mrs. Fletcher demanded. "That man carried you 15 miles across the desert, paid for your medical care and lodging, and has visited you faithfully for weeks." He is clearly in love with you too. If he loved me, he would not be leaving, Josephine said miserably. Mrs. Fletcher made an exasperated sound. Men can be fools, especially when it comes to their feelings. If you love him, you need to tell him before he rides out of your life forever. What if he does not feel the same way? What if I am just someone he helped and he feels obligated to check on me? And what if he does love you, but thinks you could not possibly care for a simple cowboy? What if he is leaving because he thinks you deserve better? Mrs. Fletcher shook her head. You will never know unless you tell him the truth. The older woman was right, Josephine realized. She had been passive in her own life for too long, letting circumstances dictate her choices. She had let her father's death and her lack of options push her toward California, toward a brother she barely knew. She had been thrown from her horse and broken her ankle and simply accepted whatever help was offered. But this, her feelings for Ryder, this was something she could control. The next morning, Josephine dressed carefully and made her way down Main Street, using her cane for support. People nodded greetings as she passed, some of the townspeople having become familiar during her weeks of recovery. She found Ryder at the livery stable, packing his saddlebags while his horse stood patiently nearby. "Josephine," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "what are you doing here? You should not be walking so far yet." "I needed to talk to you," she said, her heart pounding, "before you leave." He set down the bag he was holding, his full attention on her. "What is it?" Now that she was here, the words seemed impossible, but she thought of what Mrs. Fletcher had said, thought of the alternative of never telling him and wondering forever what might have been, and she found her courage. "I need you to know that these past weeks have meant more to me than I can say. You saved my life, yes, but you did more than that. You showed me what it means to have someone truly care about me, to put my needs above their own. You made me laugh when I was in pain, you listened when I needed to talk, and you never made me feel like a burden even though I clearly was one." "Josephine," he started, but she held up a hand. "Please let me finish. I'm in love with you, Ryder. I think I started falling the moment you climbed down into that ravine, and I have been falling ever since. I do not expect you to feel the same way, and I am not asking you to change your plans. I just needed you to know before you left. I needed you to know that you are important to me, that you matter." Ryder stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, and Josephine felt her courage begin to fail. She had made a mistake, had misread everything. He was going to let her down gently and leave, and she would have to live with the humiliation of having bared her heart to a man who saw her as nothing more than a responsibility. Then he moved. In 3 long strides, he crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that stole her breath and made her drop her cane entirely. His hands cupped her face, gentle despite the intensity of the kiss, and when he finally pulled back, his eyes were blazing. "I have been in love with you since I carried you out of that ravine," he said roughly. "Maybe even before that, the moment I saw you lying there, hurt and scared but still trying to be brave. I have been visiting you for weeks, making up excuses to come to town, torturing myself every time I had to leave. I was heading to Prescott because I thought that was what I should do, because I am just a cowboy with no prospects and you deserve so much more than that." "You are wrong," Josephine said, her hands fisting in his shirt. "You are everything I need, everything I want. Do not go to Prescott, Ryder." "Stay here, stay with me. Are you sure?" he asked, his forehead resting against hers. "I do not have much to offer you, a cowboy's wages, a life that can be hard and uncertain." "I am sure," she said firmly. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He kissed her again, softer this time but no less meaningful. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling, and Josephine felt as if she could float away with happiness. "I need to send a telegram to that ranch in Prescott. Tell them I am not coming," Ryder said, still holding her close. "And then I need to find work here in Bisbee." "Mrs. Fletcher mentioned that the ranch just outside town has been looking for a foreman," Josephine offered. "The owner is getting older and needs someone reliable to help run things." Ryder's eyes lit up. A foreman position would be steady work, good pay, enough to support a family eventually. "Eventually," Josephine teased, even though her heart was racing at the implication. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I am getting ahead of myself. We should probably court properly first. Do things the right way." "Probably," she agreed, but she was already imagining a future with him, and from the look in his eyes he was too. They walked back to the boarding house together, Ryder's arm around her waist to support her, though she suspected he would have held her that way regardless of her injury. Mrs. Fletcher took one look at them and beamed. "About time," was all she said. The next few months were the happiest of Josephine's life. Ryder got the foreman position at the ranch, which came with a small house on the property. He courted Josephine properly, taking her on walks when her ankle was strong enough, bringing her to church socials, introducing her to people around town as if she were something precious. They talked about their dreams and their pasts, learning each other's stories in depth. Josephine found work helping the town's only school teacher, Miss Patricia Harmon, who needed an assistant with the growing number of children in Bisbee. The work was rewarding, and Josephine loved seeing the children learn and grow. She was building a life here, a real life, and at the center of it was Ryder. He proposed on a warm evening in September, 6 months after he had found her in that ravine. They were sitting on the porch of his little house, watching the sun set over the hills, when he suddenly knelt before her. "Josephine Ashford, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You changed my life the day I found you, and I have been thanking God for that gunshot that spooked your horse ever since. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life taking care of you and loving you the way you deserve?" She was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." The ring he slipped on her finger was simple, a thin silver band with a small turquoise stone, but it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. They married in October of 1882, in the small church in Bisbee with Mrs. Fletcher and Dr. Chen, and half the town in attendance. Josephine wore a dress she had sewn herself with Mrs. Fletcher's help, cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ryder wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed her with such tenderness that Josephine felt tears on her cheeks. They were tears of joy this time, so different from the tears of pain and fear she had shed in that ravine all those months ago. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Ryder's work as foreman was demanding, often requiring him to be up before dawn and not returning until after dark. Josephine continued her work at the school, but she also took on the responsibility of maintaining their home and learning the skills of a ranch wife. But through it all, their love only grew stronger. Ryder was attentive and devoted, never failing to tell Josephine how much he loved her, to show her with both his words and his actions. And Josephine learned to be a true partner to him, supporting him through difficult days, celebrating his successes, and building a life with him that was richer than anything she had imagined. In the spring of 1883, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. Ryder was overjoyed, immediately becoming even more protective of her than he already was. He insisted she stop working at the school, at least for the time being, and he made sure she had everything she needed to be comfortable. Their first child, a son, was born in December of 1883 on a cold winter morning. They named him Samuel Ryder Zimmerman, and from the moment Ryder held his son for the first time, Josephine knew she had never seen a man more filled with love and awe. "He is perfect," Ryder whispered, tears streaming down his face as he gazed at the tiny baby in his arms. "You are perfect. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a family." Josephine, exhausted but happy, reached out to touch her husband's face. "We made him together. This is our family, Ryder. Yours and mine." Raising Samuel was both exhausting and exhilarating. He was a healthy, energetic baby who grew into an adventurous toddler. Ryder was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about horses and cattle and the land. Josephine would watch them together, her heart full to bursting. In 1885, they had a second child, a daughter they named Emily Grace. She had Josephine's dark hair and Ryder's gray eyes, and she was the apple of her father's eye from the moment she was born. Where Samuel was bold and reckless, Emily was thoughtful and gentle, and together they filled the little house with laughter and love. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Ryder advanced in his career, eventually becoming a partner in the ranch he managed. Josephine returned to teaching when the children were old enough, finding fulfillment in both her work and her family. They added on to their house, making room for their growing family, and became pillars of the Bisbee community. Josephine's ankle never fully recovered from the break. She walked with a slight limp for the rest of her life, and on cold days it would ache. But she never regretted that fall in the ravine, never wished it had not happened. Because that accident, as terrible as it was, had brought her Ryder. It had led her to the life she was meant to live, to the love she was meant to have. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder took her back to the spot where he had found her. It was the first time she had been back since the accident, and she was surprised by how much smaller the ravine looked now, how less intimidating the landscape seemed. "I was so scared that day," she said, standing at the edge and looking down. "I thought I was going to die out here, alone and forgotten." Ryder's arm came around her waist, pulling her close. "Instead, you found me, or I found you, however you want to look at it." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved more than life itself. His face had more lines now, his hair showing traces of silver at the temples, but he was still the same Ryder who had climbed down to help her, who had carried her across the desert, who had shown her what true love looked like. "I think we found each other," she said softly. "I think we were meant to find each other." He kissed her there, in the shadow of the ravine where their story had begun, and Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. By 1895, 13 years after that fateful day in the desert, Ryder and Josephine had 4 children. After Samuel and Emily had come another son, Thomas, in 1888, and then a surprise late addition, another daughter named Margaret, in 1893. Their house was always full of noise and activity, with children running in and out, friends visiting, ranch hands stopping by for Josephine's famous meals. Samuel, now 12, was already showing signs of becoming a rancher like his father. He spent every moment he could with Ryder, learning the business, developing the same steady, reliable nature that made Ryder so respected in the community. Emily, at 10, had inherited her mother's love of learning and was always buried in a book when she was not helping with her younger siblings. Thomas, at 7, was the wild one, constantly getting into scrapes and adventures that gave both his parents gray hairs. And little Margaret, barely 2, was the baby of the family, spoiled by everyone and ruling the household with her chubby fists and irresistible smile. Josephine had fully recovered from her injury years ago, though she still had her limp and the occasional ache. She had taken over as the full-time teacher at the Bisbee School after Miss Harmon retired, and she loved her work. She took pride in seeing her students grow and learn, in knowing she was making a difference in their lives. Ryder had become one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. The older rancher he had worked for had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving Ryder the ranch in his will in recognition of his years of loyal service and excellent management. Ryder had built it into one of the most prosperous operations in southern Arizona, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. But despite their success and their busy lives, Ryder and Josephine always made time for each other. Every evening after the children were in bed, they would sit together on their porch, talking about their day, making plans for the future, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, connected by a love that had only deepened with time. "You ever think about that day?" Ryder asked one such evening, his arm around Josephine as they watched the stars come out. "The day I found you, all the time," Josephine admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I was going to die. And then you appeared, like something out of a dream, and changed everything." "I think about it too," Ryder said quietly, "about how easily I could have missed you. If I had been tracking those rustlers just a mile to the east, if I had not heard that gunshot, if I had decided to make camp before investigating. Our whole lives hung on such small chances." Josephine reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble of his evening beard under her fingers. "But we did not miss each other. We found each other and we built this beautiful life together. 4 amazing children, a home, a community. We found love, Ryder. Real, lasting love. That is what matters." He turned his head to kiss her palm, and the gesture was so tender, so full of the devotion that had never wavered in all their years together, that Josephine felt her eyes prick with tears. "I love you," she said, as she had said countless times before but never grew tired of saying. "I love you so much." "And I love you," he replied, pulling her closer. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the tomorrows after that. You are my everything, Josephine. You always will be." In the house behind them, they could hear the faint sounds of their children settling down for the night. Samuel reading a story to Thomas and Margaret while Emily sang a soft lullaby. It was the sound of family, of home, of a life built on love and commitment, and the miracle of 2 people finding each other when they needed each other most. As they sat together under the Arizona stars, Ryder and Josephine knew that despite the challenges they had faced and would undoubtedly face in the future, they had something that would see them through anything. They had each other, and that was enough. That would always be enough. The years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows of a life well lived. In 1898, Samuel left home to attend university in California, studying agriculture and business with plans to return and help expand the family ranch. His departure left a hole in the household, but Josephine and Ryder were proud of the young man he had become, strong and smart and kind, with his father's steady nature and his mother's compassionate heart. Emily, at 13, was blossoming into a beautiful young woman with a fierce intelligence and a passion for teaching. She often helped her mother at the school, and Josephine could see her daughter following in her footsteps. Thomas, at 10, had finally started to settle down, channeling his wild energy into becoming an accomplished rider and developing a talent for training horses. And Margaret, now 5, was the princess of the family, charming everyone she met while also showing signs of having inherited her mother's stubborn streak. Ryder was now in his early 40s, still strong and capable but with silver threading liberally through his dark hair. Josephine, at 40, had laugh lines around her eyes and a few strands of gray herself, but Ryder still told her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and the way he looked at her made her believe it. On their 16th anniversary, Ryder had a surprise for Josephine. He had been working on something in secret for months, and when he finally revealed it, she was speechless. He had commissioned a local craftsman to create a beautiful wooden sign for their ranch, burned into the wood with careful artistry. It read, "Josephine's Hope Ranch ESD, 1882. I named the ranch for you," Ryder explained, his arm around her as they stood looking at the new sign. "Because you are my hope, Josephine. You always have been. That day I found you in the ravine, I was lost in my own way, drifting from job to job, never putting down roots. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me hope for a future I had not even known I wanted. This ranch, this life, our children, it is all because of you. Because of the hope you brought into my life." Josephine was crying, overwhelmed by the gesture and by the love in her husband's words. "You saved my life that day," she said through her tears. "In every way a person can be saved. I was broken, Ryder, and not just my ankle. I was lost and alone and scared of the future. You put me back together. You showed me what it means to be loved, to be cherished. You gave me a home and a family and a life beyond anything I had ever dreamed of. If I brought hope into your life, you brought everything into mine." They held each other there under the Arizona sun, the sign representing their ranch and their life together standing proudly beside them. And if the ranch hands who saw them smiled at the sight of their boss and his wife embracing like young lovers, well, it was a familiar sight by now. Everyone in Bisbee knew the story of Ryder and Josephine Zimmerman, the cowboy who had carried an injured woman across the desert and found his soulmate in the process. By 1902, 20 years after their first meeting, the Zimmerman family had become a true dynasty in Bisbee. Samuel had returned from university and was working alongside his father to modernize and expand the ranch. He had brought back new techniques and ideas, and together, father and son were making Josephine's Hope Ranch one of the most progressive and successful operations in the territory. Emily had indeed become a teacher, taking over from her mother at the Bisbee school when Josephine decided to retire and focus on her growing family. At 17, Emily was beloved by her students, bringing the same passion and dedication to teaching that her mother had shown. Thomas, at 14, was developing a reputation as the best horse trainer in southern Arizona. He had a natural gift with animals, a patience and understanding that allowed him to work with even the most difficult horses. Ranchers from all over the territory were sending their horses to him for training, and Margaret, now 9, was showing an artistic talent that delighted everyone. She spent hours sketching the desert landscape, the horses, her family, creating beautiful drawings that captured the essence of their lives in the Arizona territory. Ryder and Josephine, now in their mid-40s, were approaching the stage of life where they could begin to step back and watch their children carry forward what they had built. But they were still vital and active, still deeply involved in the ranch and the community, still as in love as they had been on their wedding day. On a warm evening in June of 1902, the entire family gathered for dinner to celebrate Samuel's 21st birthday. The table was crowded with food that Josephine and the girls had spent all day preparing, and the conversation was lively and full of laughter. These family dinners were Josephine's favorite times, when everyone was together, sharing stories and jokes, connected by the bonds of love that held them all. After dinner, as the younger children cleared the table and Emily played the piano in the parlor, Ryder took Josephine's hand and led her outside to their favorite spot on the porch. "You remember 20 years ago today?" he asked, settling into the porch swing beside her. Josephine thought back, then smiled. "It was the day you proposed. I was so nervous," Ryder admitted. "I was sure you would say no, that you would realize you could do so much better than a cowboy foreman." "I never thought that," Josephine said firmly. "Not for one single moment. You were everything I wanted, everything I needed. You still are." He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Emily's piano playing drift through the open windows, hearing Thomas and Margaret arguing about something in the kitchen, the everyday sounds of family life. "I have been thinking," Ryder said eventually, "about passing more of the ranch operations to Samuel. He is ready, and I am ready to spend more time just enjoying life with you. Maybe we could travel a bit, see some of the places we have always talked about, California, maybe up to Colorado. We have spent our whole lives building this ranch, raising our children. Maybe it is time to take some time for just us." Josephine looked up at him, seeing the man she loved, older now but no less dear to her. "I would like that. I would like that very much." The years from 1902 to 1910 were golden ones for Ryder and Josephine. They did travel, taking trips throughout the Southwest, and even venturing to San Francisco to visit Josephine's brother, with whom she had reconciled through letters over the years. But they always returned to Bisbee, to their home, because that was where they belonged. They watched with pride as their children grew into remarkable adults. Samuel married in 1905 to a lovely young woman from Tucson named Catherine, and they gave Ryder and Josephine their first grandchild, a boy named Ryder Joseph, in 1906. The joy of holding his grandson, of seeing his name carried forward, moved Ryder to tears. Emily married in 1908 to a young doctor who had just opened a practice in Bisbee, and they were expecting their first child. Thomas, at 22, was courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and wedding bells seemed likely in the near future. Only Margaret, at 17 and fiercely independent, showed no interest in settling down, preferring to focus on her art and talking about going to study in New York or Paris. Josephine's ankle, which had been bothering her more in recent years, finally required her to use a cane regularly. She did not mind. That cane was a reminder of where she had been, how far she had come, and most importantly, how Ryder had been there for her from the very beginning and had never stopped being there for her. On their 28th anniversary in October of 1910, Ryder took Josephine on a special trip. He had planned it in secret, and when they arrived at their destination, Josephine was stunned to realize where they were. "The ravine," she said softly, looking at the place where her life had changed forever. "I thought it was time to come back," Ryder said, helping her down from the buggy. "To remember where we started, to honor that day that brought us together." They stood at the edge of the ravine, looking down at the rocks below. It looked different now, older somehow, or perhaps they were the ones who had changed, who had aged while the land remained eternal. "I fell down there," Josephine said, pointing to the spot she remembered. "I thought I was going to die." "And I climbed down there to save you," Ryder added, pointing to the path he had taken. "The best decision I ever made in my life." Josephine turned to look at her husband, this man who had been her rock, her love, her everything for nearly 3 decades. "Do you know what I remember most about that day? It was not the pain, though God knows that was terrible. It was not even the fear, though I was terrified. It was the moment I heard your voice, calm and sure, telling me you were going to take care of me. In that moment, something inside me knew that you were important, that you were going to change my life. I did not know how yet, did not know we would fall in love and marry and have children and build this incredible life together. But I knew you mattered." Ryder's eyes were bright with emotion. I knew the same thing. The moment I saw you lying there, hurt and scared but still trying to be brave, something in me recognized something in you. We were meant to find each other, Josephine. I truly believe that. The universe, God, fate, whatever you want to call it, brought us together that day because we were meant to be together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Josephine's eyes widened in surprise. I know we are already married, Ryder said with a smile. But I wanted to give you a new ring, to replace that first one I gave you. Something that represents everything we have built together, all the years and the love and the family we have created. He opened the box to reveal a beautiful gold ring with a circle of small diamonds surrounding a larger turquoise stone. It was exquisite, elegant, and when he slipped it onto her finger beside her original wedding band, it fit perfectly. "Ryder," Josephine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It is beautiful." "You are beautiful," he corrected, pulling her into his arms. "You have been beautiful every day of the 28 years I have known you, and you will be beautiful every day for the rest of our lives." They kissed there, beside the ravine where their story began, and it felt like coming full circle. From pain and fear to love and joy, from two strangers to two souls so intertwined they could not imagine existing without each other. The years continued to bring changes and challenges. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, transitioning from territory to the 48th state in the Union. Ryder and Josephine, now prominent members of the community, attended the statehood celebrations in Phoenix, proud to see their home finally recognized. Their family continued to grow. Samuel and Catherine had 2 more children, giving Ryder and Josephine 3 grandchildren from that branch. Emily and her husband had twins, a boy and a girl, who were the delight of the family. Thomas married his rancher's daughter and took over the horse training operation, expanding it into a thriving business. Even Margaret eventually married, though not until she was 25, to an artist she met while studying in Santa Fe, and they settled back in Bisbee to open a gallery. By 1920, Ryder and Josephine were in their early 60s, officially retired from active ranch management, but still living on the property in the house they had built together so many years ago. The ranch was thriving under Samuel's management. The school had a new young teacher carrying on the traditions Emily and Josephine had established, and their children and grandchildren surrounded them with love. Josephine's health had begun to decline slightly, her old injury causing her more trouble, and she had developed a mild heart condition that required her to take things easy. But she was still sharp as a tack, still involved in her grandchildren's lives, still the center of her family's world. Ryder, despite the silver hair and the lines on his face, was still strong and vital. He spent his days working with Thomas on the horse training, playing with his grandchildren, and most importantly, caring for Josephine with the same devotion he had shown since the day he found her. On a quiet evening in September of 1920, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Josephine took Ryder's hand. "You have any regrets?" she asked softly. "About the life we have lived?" Ryder looked at her in surprise. "Regrets? Josephine, I have lived a life beyond my wildest dreams. I have a wife I love more than anything in this world, 4 incredible children, 7 grandchildren so far with more on the way, a successful ranch, and the respect of my community. What could I possibly regret?" "Sometimes I wonder if you might have wanted more," Josephine said. "If you might have gone further, done bigger things, if you had not tied yourself to me." Ryder turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Listen to me, Josephine Zimmerman. The day I found you in that ravine was the day my real life began. Everything before that was just preparation, just waiting for you. You did not hold me back from anything. You gave me everything. You are the reason I have all of this, the reason I am the man I am today. Loving you, being loved by you, building this life with you, it has been my greatest accomplishment and my greatest joy. Never doubt that, not for one single moment. Josephine's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. I love you so much. Thank you for spending your life with me. Thank you for letting me, Ryder replied, and he kissed her softly. A kiss full of tenderness and decades of shared history. They continued to sit there as the sun set completely and the stars began to appear, holding hands, connected by a love that had only grown stronger with time. They had been through so much together. Joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, the everyday moments and the extraordinary ones. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. As 1925 approached, marking 43 years since that fateful day in the ravine, Ryder and Josephine were in their late 60s. Josephine's health had become more fragile, and she spent much of her time resting, but her mind was still sharp and her spirit still strong. Ryder rarely left her side, devoted as always to her care and comfort. Their children were all successful and happy, their grandchildren were thriving, and several great-grandchildren had joined the family. The Zimmerman legacy in Bisbee was secure, built on hard work, integrity, and love. On their 43rd anniversary, the family threw a big celebration at the ranch. All of the children and grandchildren came, along with friends from throughout the community. There was food and music and laughter, and in the center of it all were Ryder and Josephine, still holding hands, still looking at each other with the same love that had brought them together all those years ago. Samuel stood up to make a toast, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. To my parents, Ryder and Josephine Zimmerman. Dad, you taught me what it means to be a man of honor, to work hard, to love deeply, and to never give up on the people you care about. Mom, you taught me compassion, strength, and the value of education and family. Together, you have shown all of us what true love looks like. 43 years ago, you found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and you built something beautiful from that meeting. You built a family, a legacy, and most importantly, a love story that will inspire generations to come. We love you both, and we are grateful every day for the example you set and the family you created. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as everyone raised their glasses. Ryder and Josephine stood together, his arm around her to steady her, and looked out at the sea of faces, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them here because of a moment of chance and choice 43 years ago. Thank you all for being here, Ryder said, his voice strong despite his age. Josephine and I have been blessed beyond measure. This family, this life, it is more than we ever dreamed of. And it all started because I heard a gunshot and decided to investigate, and because Josephine was brave enough to love a simple cowboy. Everything good in my life flows from that moment. Josephine squeezed his hand, too emotional to speak, but her expression said everything that needed to be said. She was happy, fulfilled, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had endured. The years from 1925 to 1930 passed peacefully. Ryder and Josephine spent their days quietly, enjoying their family, reminiscing about their long life together, and simply being together. They had reached the stage of life where simply being alive and together was enough. In the spring of 1932, Josephine's health took a turn for the worse. Her heart, which had been weak for years, was failing. The family gathered, knowing that the end was approaching. But even in her final days, Josephine remained the strong, loving woman she had always been, more concerned about her family than about herself. Ryder never left her bedside. He held her hand, told her stories of their life together, and made sure she knew how loved she was. On a warm evening in April, 50 years almost to the day from when they had met, Josephine passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Ryder holding her hand. The grief was overwhelming, not just for Ryder but for the entire family and community. Josephine had touched so many lives, had made such a difference, and her loss was felt deeply. But even in their sorrow, everyone could celebrate a life well lived, a love well loved. Ryder was lost without Josephine. For 50 years she had been his partner, his love, his reason for everything. The family worried about him, feared he would not last long without her. But Ryder surprised them. He grieved deeply, yes, but he also found purpose in preserving Josephine's memory and in being there for his family. He lived for another 5 years after Josephine's death, years filled with his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He told them stories of their grandmother, of the incredible woman she had been, of the love they had shared. He made sure that everyone knew the story of how they met, of the broken ankle and the desert crossing, of the love that had grown from such an unlikely beginning. In December of 1937, just after his 79th birthday, Ryder passed away quietly in his sleep. The family found him in his favorite chair, a photograph of Josephine clutched in his hand and a peaceful smile on his face. They buried him beside Josephine on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, the ranch that still bore her name. The headstones were simple but elegant, marking the resting place of two people who had lived extraordinary lives built on ordinary virtues: love, commitment, kindness, and courage. The legacy of Ryder and Josephine Zimmerman lived on in their descendants, who continued to run the ranch and make their own marks on Bisbee and Arizona. But more than the physical legacy, they left behind a story, a testament to the power of love and the way that one moment, one choice, one act of kindness can change the entire trajectory of a life. Every year on the anniversary of Ryder finding Josephine in that ravine, the family would gather at the site, now marked with a small plaque that told their story. They would share memories, tell the tale to the younger generations who had not known their great-great-grandparents, and remember the incredible love story that had started their family. Because in the end, that was what Ryder and Josephine's life had been, a love story. A love story that began with pain and fear, and a broken ankle miles from anywhere, that was built on a cowboy's strength and devotion, and a woman's courage and trust. A love story that had spanned 50 years and created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. A love story that proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we are brave enough to accept help and wise enough to recognize love when it finds us. And in that ravine in the Arizona desert, where it all began, the wind still whispered through the rocks, carrying echoes of a story that would never be forgotten, of a love that would never die, of two souls who had found each other when they needed each other most, and had held on tight for the rest of their lives.